there was a huge weekend of NFL football with the playoffs where conference championship spots were on the line. And the first of which was the Buffalo Bills taking on the Denver Broncos. And Denver did end up winning this game on a last-minute field goal, essentially. And this was a very insane game with a lot of questionable calls, a lot of controversy surrounding a specific interception. If you saw the game where the rules pretty much stated that he did not survive the ground, and if he would have just bobbled it, it would have been ruled incomplete anyway. So, people might need to refresh themselves on the rules because, most people I feel like don't even know what a catch is. So, and the NFL really does not help in that regard when you have these ticky-tacky calls that essentially decide games. But for Josh Allen, of the quarterback for the Bills, he did end up throwing for 3 touchdowns, but he did have 4 turnovers in this one. He had 2 interceptions and 2 fumbles lost. But it wasn't all bad for the Bills because their running game was really working against a very tough Denver defense. And James Cook, their running back, ended up rushing for 117 of their 183 rushing yards. Josh Allen had 66 of his own. But the Bills as a team had 183 while Denver was held to just 70. And that didn't really make a whole lot of sense to me because you have Jaleel McLaughlin and R.J. Harvey, who were their 2 running backs. They only combined for 10 carries in this game. So the fact that they were able to win still is pretty remarkable. And definitely not something I would have done as a coach. But hey, it worked out for them in the end. They got the win. Buffalo actually outgained Denver in this game by 100 yards. And they actually had a much larger time of possession. They held the ball for about 41 minutes compared to Denver's 29. But Buffalo did unfortunately have 5 total turnovers in this game. And that ended up being the difference maker for Denver. And this was a very winnable game for Buffalo. Denver did find themselves up 29-27 late in the fourth quarter. And then the Bills, whenever they had the ball, they were marching down the field. They hit this crazy hook and ladder where Josh Allen threw it to Khalil Shakir, and then he lateraled it to Ray Davis, and he ran it all the way down to the Denver 32-yard line. But unfortunately for the Bills, Dawson Knox, their tight end, was wide open, but Josh Allen just missed him. He overthrew him, he pretty much would have walked into the end zone, and that would have been the game-winning touchdown. But Buffalo would unfortunately have to settle for a field goal to tie things up at 30 and send it to overtime. But in overtime, again, they had a chance. They forced a Denver punt, but then Josh Allen threw his second interception of the game with that very controversial call where it was pretty much they were both going to the ground and the defender ripped it out of his hands essentially. And they ruled that Denver ball, and then they pretty much went down the field, and Will Lutz, former Saints kicker, ended up kicking the game-winning field goal to send Denver to the AFC Championship. But it wasn't all good news and celebrations in Denver because they found out after the game that quarterback Bo Nix did suffer a broken ankle, so he will be out the rest of the playoffs. And that is crucial because they are now starting Jarrett Stidham, who actually has not thrown a pass in an NFL game, whether it's garbage time or anything, since I want to say it was like 2023. It had been forever, so who knows how he'll play. He went to Auburn. If you're an Auburn fan, you know all too well about him before they had Bo Nix. So it's just pretty much an Auburn factory at quarterback for Denver. So we'll see how he fares against the Patriots, but we'll get into that a little bit later. Next up in the NFC, specifically in the NFC West, where 3 of the 4 remaining teams in the NFC were from that division, we have the San Francisco 49ers going to the Seattle Seahawks. And this one was not even close at any point of the game from the very first play, because Seattle did go on to win this one 41-6, but they set the tone very early where kick returner Rashid Shaheed, who also former Saint, he ended up taking the opening kickoff for a touchdown to go up early, and that pretty much was just dictating how the game was going to go. And coming into this game, there was a lot of question marks, specifically around quarterback Sam Darnold of Seattle, where he was dealing with an oblique injury, and he was questionable leading up to this game, but they did say he would end up playing. And he had a pretty solid game, although there wasn't a lot that was asked of him, given it was such a blowout, because he completed 12 of 17 passes for just 124 yards and a touchdown. Meanwhile, Kenneth Walker III, the running back, ended up rumbling over San Fran for 116 yards and 3 touchdowns. He had a hat trick in this one. But it got out of hand very, very early for San Fran. Like I said, they had the kickoff return to go up 7-0. And then Robert Tongas, their tight end for the Niners, ended up fumbling. And that ended up turning, as well as a field goal, that ended up turning into 17-0 Seattle really quickly, thanks to a Jackson Smith and Jigba touchdown, which he had made his playoff debut in this one. And he ended up catching a touchdown. So that's really cool to see. And then a pair of San Fran field goals ended up cutting the lead to 11. They made it 17-6, but then Kenneth Walker ended up scoring to make it 24-6 at halftime. And Seattle pretty much never looked back from this. They ended up having 3 takeaways off of San Fran. They had 2 fumble recoveries and an interception from Brock Purdy, their quarterback for the Niners, who ended up finishing with 15 of 27 completed passes for 140 yards and that interception. But for Seattle, Sam Darnold, this is actually his first career playoff win. Last season, he made his debut, and he got waxed by the Rams when he was with the Minnesota Vikings. They ended up losing 27-9 in that one, where he took 9 sacks in that game. That was his playoff debut last year, and now in the NFC Championship game, he gets a rematch with the Rams against the MVP frontrunner, Matthew Stafford of Los Angeles. So that is going to be must-see TV. Meanwhile, in New England, it was pretty much a cluster of a game, very ugly game for the most part, where the Patriots were hosting the Houston Texans. And this was a turnover fest throughout the entire thing because quarterback C.J. Stroud for the Texans, he ended up having 4 interceptions in the first half. So it was just horrible way to start for Houston, and they could never really keep themselves in the game. As good as their defense was, they were the number 1 defense all year coming into this game, and they still held New England to 21 offensive points, which isn't, it's not too bad. But for New England, quarterback Drake May, who was also in the MVP race, he ended up having 3 turnovers of his own, and they just really couldn't hang on to the ball. One of those, an interception at the end of the half, was on a Hail Mary, so it really wasn't against him, but he ended up fumbling the ball twice, and they really need to clean things up coming into the AFC Championship game if they want any chance to go to the Super Bowl. But then getting things started early for the Patriots, they found themselves facing a 4th and 1 situation on Houston's 28-yard line, and then Drake May connected with Demario Pop Douglas, who took it 28 yards for a touchdown to make it 7-0. A Houston field goal cut the lead to 4. They made it 7-3, and it was a very competitive game going into it. Very early on in the first half because they forced a Patriots punt. They got the ball back. They had themselves 1st and 10 at New England's 36-yard line, and that's when C.J. Stroud threw an interception, which derailed the whole drive. But then their defense came up huge where they forced a Drake May fumble, and the Texans capitalized on this, finding Christian Kirk, their wide receiver, for the touchdown to make it 10-7. So they took a lead early on in this game. They just could never keep it, unfortunately. And it was largely due to the offensive output of this game because the defense showed up. They forced another Patriots punt, and then the very first play of Houston's next possession, C.J. Stroud throws a pick 6 to Marcus Jones of New England to make it 14-10. And then going into the fourth quarter, it was 21-16 thanks to a couple other field goals from Houston. And the Patriots, unfortunately, Kayshon Boutte, as you see in that picture right here, former LSU wide receiver, he ended up coming up with one of the best catches I've seen all year, that one-handed catch going down into the end zone to make it 28-16 on a 32-yard catch. And Drake May in this game, he didn't play his best, but he still ended up having 3 passing touchdowns, which no quarterback had done this season. He's the first quarterback all year, including the playoffs, to throw for 3 passing touchdowns against this Houston Texans defense, which was hounding them all day long. So the fact that they are still in there and able to hang on for the win just proves how great they did in face of that adversity. But looking to the snowy tundra in Chicago, we had the Chicago Bears hosting the Los Angeles Rams for a chance to go to the NFC Championship. The Rams would hang on to win this one very late in overtime, 20-17, after one of the craziest plays I've ever seen from Caleb Williams. I'll get into that in a minute. But the Rams were actually outgained by Chicago 417 to 340. But the 3 interceptions from Bears quarterback Caleb Williams were the difference in this one, especially at the end of the game. At the half, the score was 10-10, so it was very, very closely contested throughout the entire thing. And then opening the second half, or going in late to the fourth quarter, the Rams led a 91-yard touchdown drive, which was capped off by running back Kyron Williams scoring a touchdown to make it 17-10. And then the Bears, they had plenty of chances to just take the points and kick the field goal instead of going for it on fourth down. They had it 1st and goal at the Rams 5, and then after 3 straight runs that really went nowhere, I mean, they got a few yards out of it. They went down to the 2-yard line, but then they went for it on 4th and goal at the 2, and it was incomplete, so they got nothing out of that. And then they found themselves, again, 4th and 4 at the Rams' 14-yard line very late in the game, and they went for it again, of course. You kind of had to in that situation after not taking the points. But Caleb Williams, the quarterback for the Bears, he ended up snapping the ball. The Rams brought a ton of pressure. He ended up running backwards. Keep in mind, you're at the 14-yard line when this ball is snapped. He runs all the way back to the 40 and just kind of like fade away, throws it off the back foot, and somehow tight end Cole Kmet is wide open in the back of the end zone, and they score to tie it up at 17 and send it into overtime. That was one of the craziest plays I've ever seen in playoff history. Like, the fact that he was so open, insane throw by Caleb, by the way. I don't know how he got that off after running almost 30 yards backwards. Like, that is absolutely ridiculous. But in overtime, Chicago did have another chance to win this one outright, and they forced a Rams punt, and they had the ball at midfield, but Caleb threw his 3rd interception of the game, and that all but sealed it for the Bears because the Rams ended up driving down and kicking a game-winning field goal thanks to Harrison Mevis, who is known as the thicker kicker, and ended up hitting a 42-yard game-winning field goal to send them to the conference championship. For the Bears, they were 3-6 on their 4th down attempts, and you got to wonder how many points they left on the board here, which could have been the deciding factor in them winning the game.